I did not lose my home to fire, debt, or a natural disaster. I lost it to a sentence as cold as steel from my own brother before the funeral flowers even wilted. He changed the locks while I worked the night shift and tossed my life onto the porch like trash. He thought he had won everything, but he did not know the house he claimed to own was actually just the first trap Mom left behind. My name is Sailor Rivera, and I am 34 years old. I was standing in the fluorescent purgatory of the Cedar Ridge Wellness Center when my life cleaved into two distinct halves. It was the sort of Tuesday that felt heavy with the scent of rubbing alcohol and the low, electric hum of vending machines. I was halfway through a double shift, my eyes burning from the harsh lighting, checking the vitals of a patient who was more interested in the evening news than his blood pressure. Then the phone rang at the nurse's station. It was not a ring that signaled a routine inquiry or a scheduling conflict. It had the shrill, insistent pitch of catastrophe. The chaplain from the State Highway Patrol did not mince words. He told me about the black ice on Interstate 70. He spoke of a chain reaction collision, the kind that makes the morning papers and then disappears, leaving families hollowed out in its wake. He told me that my parents, Gordon and Elena Rivera, were gone, just like that. No goodbyes, no lingering illnesses, just the brutal physics of metal against metal on a frozen Missouri highway. The days that followed were a blur of logistics that felt surgically detached from my actual grief. The funeral took place in a sprawling brick church in a suburb of St. Louis, the kind of town where lawns are manicured to the millimeter and secrets are buried under layers of polite conversation. The air was biting cold, the sky a flat, unyielding sheet of gray steel. I sat in the front row, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Beside me, my husband, Ryan, held my hand so tight I thought my knuckles might crack. But my brother, Miles, sat on the other side, creating a physical and emotional chasm between us. He looked impeccable. His suit was tailored, black, and sharp enough to cut. He did not look like a grieving son. He looked like a CEO at a shareholder meeting for a company under distress. When Miles walked up to the podium to deliver the eulogy, the church went silent. He adjusted the microphone with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He spoke for 20 minutes. He spoke of our father, Gordon Rivera. He talked about the construction company Dad had built from the ground up. He used words like legacy, foundation, and empire. He painted a portrait of a titan of industry, a man of iron will. He mentioned our mother, Elena, exactly twice, once to say she was a devoted wife, and once to say she kept the home fires burning. It was a sales pitch. He was selling the image of the Rivera family to the community, ensuring that everyone knew the hierarchy remained intact. The king was dead. Long live the king. I sat there, swallowing the bile rising in my throat, remembering the woman who actually held us together, the woman whose hands were always stained with garden soil and whose silence held more weight than my father's shouting matches. Miles erased her in real time, reducing her to a supporting character in the Gordon Rivera show. After the service, we stood in the narthex, shaking hands with people who murmured generic condolences. The air smelled of lilies and damp wool. I was exhausted, my bones aching with a fatigue that sleep could not touch. I turned to Miles, intending to ask him about the reception arrangements, about whether he had remembered to order the vegetarian options for Mom's cousins. Miles stepped in close. He invaded my personal space, leaning down so his breath hit my ear. It smelled of mints and expensive scotch. "The house is mine," he whispered. I blinked, confused, my brain sluggish. "What?" "The house," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave, smooth and lethal. "It is mine, family tradition, sailor, the son takes it all. That is how Dad wanted it. That is how it works." I stared at him. We were standing 5 feet away from the casket. "Miles, this is not the time to—" "It is exactly the time." He cut me off, his eyes scanning the room to ensure no one was watching our intimate little war. "I do not want any confusion. You have been living there for 2 years playing nursemaid, and I appreciate that. But your shift is over. I need the property vacant." "Vacant," I choked out the word. "I live there. Ryan lives there. We gave up our apartment to care for Mom." "And Mom is gone," Miles said, checking his watch. "You have until the weekend. Move out." He patted my shoulder, a gesture of mock comfort for the audience watching us, and then walked away to shake hands with a local councilman, his face arranging itself back into a mask of solemn dignity. I stood there, paralyzed. I tried to process the concept of tradition he had thrown at me. There was no such tradition. There was law. There was probate. There was decency. But in the Rivera family, tradition was just a code word for whatever the men wanted. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of denial. I told myself it was grief talking. I told Ryan that Miles was just stressed, that he was lashing out because he was hurting. Ryan did not believe it, but he stayed silent, packing a few bags just in case. 2 days later, the sky opened up. It was a freezing, relentless rain that turned the world into a mud-slicked mess. I finished my shift at Cedar Ridge and drove toward the house. The house I grew up in, the house where I had spent every day of the last 2 years changing IV bags and reading aloud to my mother. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same, a sturdy 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters, but something felt wrong. The porch light was off, leaving the entrance in shadow. I ran through the rain, clutching my purse, shielding my head with a newspaper. I jammed my key into the front door lock. It did not turn. I jiggled it. I pulled it out and tried again. I checked to make sure it was the right key. It was. I shoved it in again, harder this time, twisting until the metal bit into my palm. Nothing. Then I looked closer. The deadbolt was new. It was not the tarnished brass fixture I had known since childhood. It was shiny, silver, brushed nickel. It looked sterile and modern. It looked like a fresh surgical cut on an old body. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I pounded on the door. "Miles!" I shouted. The rain was soaking through my scrubs, plastering my hair to my face. "Miles, open the door." No answer. I stepped back, wiping water from my eyes, and that was when I saw it, on the side of the porch, where the overhang offered little protection from the driving wind, lay a pile of refuse. It was a chaotic, wet mound of cardboard and plastic. I walked toward it, my boots squelching in the mud. It was not trash. It was my life. My breath hitched in a sob. There were 3 cardboard boxes, already sagging from the moisture. One had tipped over, spilling its contents onto the wet concrete. I saw my nursing certification, the paper curling and dissolving into pulp. I saw the wooden keepsake box I'd kept on my nightstand. The lid cracked open, and I saw the photograph. It was a framed picture of Mom and me in the garden, taken 3 summers ago. It was face up in a puddle. The water had seeped under the glass. The ink was bleeding. Mom's face was dissolving, turning into a smear of violet and gray. It looked like a memory being clawed out of existence. I fell to my knees, ignoring the cold water soaking into my pants. I grabbed the photo, wiping it frantically with my sleeve, but the damage was done. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." A movement caught my eye. I looked up at the living room window. The curtains were drawn back slightly. Talia Wexler, my brother's wife, was standing there. The warm, golden light of the living room framed her silhouette. She was holding a glass of red wine, her fingers manicured, her posture relaxed. She looked out at me, shivering, wet, kneeling in the dirt with the same expression she used when a delivery driver was late with her package. Mild annoyance, complete detachment. She took a sip of wine, watched me for another second, and then let the curtain fall back into place. Rage, hot and white, replaced the panic. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands. The screen was slick with rain. I dialed Miles. He answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you are done making a scene," he said. His voice was calm, background noise suggesting he was watching television. "You changed the locks," I screamed. "My stuff is on the porch. It is raining. Miles, my things are ruined." "I told you the deadline was the weekend," he said. "I decided to accelerate the timeline. I have realtors coming tomorrow. I cannot have your clutter everywhere. I live here. You cannot just kick me out without an eviction notice. It is illegal." I checked. "Sailor," he said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "I am the executor. The deed is in the family trust, and as the primary beneficiary of the business assets, I have the authority to secure the property. You have 24 hours to remove that junk from my porch before I call a hauling service to take it to the dump. Miles, Mom's pictures are out here. They are getting destroyed." "Then you better hurry up," he said. "You have 24 hours. Do not make me call the police for trespassing." The line went dead. I sat there on the wet concrete step, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. The rain drummed against the roof, a relentless rhythm of indifference. I was 34 years old. I had a career. I had been a good daughter. And now I was homeless, sitting in a puddle, locked out of the house where I had nursed my mother until her last breath. I pulled my knees to my chest, shivering violently. The cold was seeping into my marrow. I felt small. I felt erased. Headlights swept across the driveway. Cutting through the darkness, a car door slammed. Footsteps pounded on the pavement, heavy and fast. "Sailor." It was Ryan. He ran up the walkway, his face pale with shock. He did not ask questions. He did not ask why I was on the floor. He saw the locks. He saw the boxes. He saw Talia's shadow in the window. He understood everything in a single glance. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around my shoulders, pulling me up from the ground. His hands were warm, anchoring me back to reality. "I am going to kill him," Ryan said, his voice trembling with a fury I had never heard before. "I am going to kick that door down, and I am going to kill him." "No," I chattered, my teeth clicking together. "No, the police. He said he would call the police." Ryan looked at the pile of soaked belongings. He looked at the ruined photo in my hand. He swore, a harsh sound that cracked in the cold air. He knelt down and started grabbing what he could, trying to shield the boxes with his own body. He picked up a plastic bag that had been stuffed into the side of one of the crates. It was a bag of old medical receipts I had kept for tax purposes. But as he lifted it, something fell out. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax, something old-fashioned and strange. It had fallen out of a box of Mom's old gardening journals that Miles had tossed out with my things. Ryan froze. He picked it up. The rain hit the paper, but the wax seal held. He squinted at the front of the envelope in the dim porch light. He turned to me, and the look on his face stopped my shivering for a second. It was not anger anymore. It was fear, pure, unadulterated shock. "Sailor," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "What?" I asked, wiping water from my face. "Just leave it, Ryan. It is all trash." "No," he said. He walked over to me, shielding the envelope under his shirt. He held it out so I could see the front. "Look at this." It was in the box with her journals. I looked down. The handwriting was shaky, the loops of the letters uneven, betraying the tremors that had plagued her hands in the final months. But it was unmistakable. It was the script I had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for my entire life. "It looks like your mother's writing," Ryan said. I stared at the envelope. My name was written on the front. Just my name, Sailor, and below my name, in smaller, jagged letters, was a sentence that made the cold rain feel suddenly irrelevant. "Open only when the locks change." I looked from the envelope to the shiny silver deadbolt on the door. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather crawled up my spine. Mom had known, somehow, amidst the pain and the morphine and the slow fading of the light, she had known exactly what Miles would do. I took the envelope. It felt heavy, like it contained something denser than paper. "Let's go," I whispered, clutching it to my chest. "Get me out of here." Ryan nodded, grabbing the driest box he could find. But as we walked to the car, leaving the rest of my past soaking on the porch. I did not look back at the window where Talia stood. I looked at the envelope in my hand. Miles thought he had thrown me out. He thought he had discarded me like the rest of the rubbish. But he did not know that he had just handed me the weapon that would bring his entire kingdom crashing down. The war had started, and I had just received my first order. To understand why my brother left me shivering on a rain-slicked porch with my life in garbage bags. You cannot look at the funeral. You have to look at the dinner table. You have to look at the hierarchy that Gordon Rivera built, brick by brick. Long before he died on an icy highway, my father did not just build houses, he built a kingdom, and in the kingdom of Gordon Rivera, biology was destiny. He owned Rivera Construction, a mid-sized firm that had poured the concrete foundations for half the strip malls in St. Louis County to the outside world. He was a self-made man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps. Inside our four walls, he was a monarch looking for an heir, and he decided the day Miles was born that the search was over. There was an unwritten constitution in our house. Rule number 1 was that success looked like a man in a hard hat or a suit, and never a woman in scrubs. Miles was 4 years older than me, and from the moment he could walk, he was Gordon's shadow. I remember weekends when I was 10 years old. I would be sitting at the kitchen island, watching my mother chop vegetables in a silence so thick it felt like humidity. The back door would fly open, and Dad and Miles would stomp in. Boots caked in red Missouri clay, smelling of diesel and sawdust. They were loud. They took up space. They were the main characters returning from the War of Commerce, while Mom and I were the background extras waiting to serve them iced tea. Dad would clap a heavy hand on Miles's shoulder and say that the boy had an eye for grading land. He never asked about my spelling test. He never asked about the science fair. If I tried to speak about my day, Dad would nod absently, his eyes already drifting back to Miles, back to the future of the company. I was not being abused. I was being managed. I was being prepared for a life of supporting others, while Miles was being prepared to rule. By the time we were teenagers, the divide was a canyon. Miles was given internships that were really just paid networking events. He was handed keys to trucks he did not know how to fix, and introduced to bankers he did not know how to talk to. He failed a math class in high school, and Dad hired a private tutor for $50 an hour, laughing it off as Miles being a big picture guy. When I told Dad I wanted to go to nursing school, he looked at me over the top of his newspaper and asked if I was sure I did not just want to find a husband. He said he would not pay for a degree that would just end up collecting dust once I had kids. So I did it myself. I applied for Pell Grants. I worked double shifts at a diner where the tips were mostly quarters. I paid for my own certification exams. Every dollar I spent on my education was a dollar I had earned standing on my own 2 feet. I thought this would make him proud. I thought proving I had his work ethic would finally earn me a seat at the table. I was wrong. In the Rivera worldview, my independence was not an achievement. It was an embarrassment. It suggested that the family could not take care of its own women. Then I brought Ryan home. Ryan Hensley is the best man I know. He works in emergency services, dealing with trauma and chaos for a salary that barely covers the rent in a decent neighborhood. He has calluses on his hands and a calmness in his eyes that you only get from seeing the fragility of life up close. But to my family, Ryan was invisible. He was not a power player. He did not play golf at the club in Ladue. He drove a used sedan with a dent in the rear bumper. I will never forget the first Christmas dinner Ryan attended. We were seated in the formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier that Mom was terrified of dusting. Miles was wearing a watch that cost more than Ryan's car. Talia, Miles's wife, was talking about a charity gala in Clayton, dropping names of local celebrities like she was dealing cards. Ryan tried to join the conversation. He mentioned a complex rescue his team had performed on the riverfront, a story about teamwork and grit. Dad listened for exactly 10 seconds before turning to Miles and asking about the lumber futures. It was a surgical cut. Ryan was silenced. Not with a shout, but with the absolute indifference of a king dismissing a peasant. After dinner, while I was washing dishes because that was what the women did. Miles leaned against the counter. He held a glass of scotch that was older than I was. He looked at me and said that Ryan seemed like a nice guy, but he hoped I was not planning on relying on him. He said that guys like Ryan burned out or hurt their backs by 40. He told me I should think about the long term. The implication was clear. Ryan was temporary, Ryan was low rent, and I was settling. But the real toxicity was not just the sexism, it was the money, or rather, the appearance of money. Miles and Talia lived a life that was curated for an audience. They bought a house they could not afford in a zip code that mattered. They leased luxury SUVs that they swapped out every 2 years. Their Instagram feeds were a relentless parade of vacations in Tulum, private tasting menus, and designer shopping bags. They looked like the American dream on steroids. But I have good hearing, and I have a habit of being ignored, which makes me an excellent spy. The cracks started showing about 18 months before the accident. It was subtle at first. I would see Miles decline a call on his cell phone, his jaw tightening, a flash of genuine fear in his eyes before he plastered the smile back on. I saw letters from the bank on his kitchen counter, unopened, buried under stacks of glossy magazines. The moment that changed everything happened last Thanksgiving. Mom was already sick then, though we were pretending she was just tired. I was in the hallway, carrying a tray of appetizers, when I heard voices in the den. The door was cracked open just an inch. It was Miles and Talia. They were not using their party voices. They were hissing at each other. Talia was saying that they could not float the second mortgage anymore. She said the credit line was tapped out. She sounded frantic, her voice climbing into a register of panic that did not match her Botoxed forehead. Miles cut her off. His voice was low, shaking with a mixture of rage and desperation. I stopped breathing. I stood there in the hallway, gripping the silver tray until my fingers turned white. He told her to just wait. He said Dad's will was ironclad. He said the business was going to him, and the liquid assets were substantial. Then he said the sentence that I replayed in my head the night he locked me out. He said the house would save them. He did not say the house would be a nice bonus. He did not say the house would help them upgrade. He used the word save. People with healthy portfolios do not need saving. People who are swimming in cash do not look at their parents' death as a lifeboat. They only talk like that when they are drowning. They only talk like that when the water is already filling their lungs. That was the moment I realized my brother was not a tycoon. He was a fraud. He was bleeding money. The expensive suits were a costume. The country club membership was a mask. He was leveraged to the hilt, gambling on a future inheritance to pay for a past of excess. I looked at Mom during dinner that night. She was sitting at the end of the table, picking at her turkey. Elena Rivera was a woman who had spent 40 years making herself small so her husband and son could feel big. She smoothed the tablecloth, her eyes moving from Miles to Dad to me. She did not say much. She never did. But that night, I saw something in her gaze that I had missed before. It was calculation. She was watching Miles pour a third glass of wine. She was watching Talia check her phone under the table every 2 minutes. She was watching Dad boast about a contract he had not actually signed yet, and she was watching me. For years, I thought Mom was passive. I thought she was just a passenger in Dad's car, going wherever he drove her. But looking back, I realized she was the only one paying attention to the road. She saw the cliff coming. She saw that Miles was not the heir apparent. He was a parasite waiting for a host. She saw that his success was a hollow shell painted gold, and that the moment the money stopped flowing from Dad, Miles would collapse. I did not say anything that night. I went back to my apartment with Ryan, and we paid our electric bill online, and we worried about the cost of groceries. We were not rich, but we were solvent. We owned our struggle. Miles owned nothing but debt and a sense of entitlement that was about to turn lethal. The tragedy of the Rivera family was never that we did not love each other. It was that love was conditional. It was a transaction. You were loved if you were useful. You were loved if you reflected glory back onto the patriarch. I was not useful. I was a nurse who married a paramedic. We were the help. We were the people you called when things went wrong, not the people you invited to the gala. But as I sat there in the weeks leading up to the funeral, watching Miles maneuver and position himself, I kept thinking about that word, save. He needed the house to save him. He needed the equity. He needed the quick sale. He needed to erase the history of that house and turn it into a check that would clear his debts before the facade crumbled completely. That was why he could not wait. That was why he violated the sanctity of the grieving period. He was not just greedy, he was terrified. And a terrified man is a dangerous man. He thought I was the obstacle. He thought I was just the sister who needed to be brushed aside so he could cash out. He looked at me and saw a pushover. He saw the girl who washed the dishes. He saw the woman who had spent 2 years changing bedpans and administering medication without asking for a dime. He forgot one thing. Nurses notice details. We notice when a patient is lying about their pain. We notice when the vitals do not match the story. I had been watching him for 2 years. I knew he was desperate. I knew he was weak. And thanks to the envelope Ryan had rescued from the rain, I knew something else. I knew that while Dad was busy building his empire and Miles was busy pretending to run it, Mom had been busy too. She had been quietly rewriting the rules of the game. She had not been staring blankly at the tablecloth all those years. She had been planning a coup. The Rivera family tradition was about to collide with the only force stronger than a patriarch's will, a mother's protection. I just did not know the full extent of it yet. All I knew was that the lines had been drawn, and for the first time in my life, I was not going to apologize for taking up space. I was going to find out what was in that envelope, and I was going to make sure that if Miles wanted a war, he was going to get one that would leave scars. Because the thing about people who think they are drowning is that they will drag anyone down with them to stay afloat. Miles had tried to drown me. He had tried to wash me away with the rain. He should have checked to see if I could swim, to understand the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. You have to understand the mathematics of the last 2 years. I do not measure that time in months or weeks. I measure it in prescription refills, in sleepless nights, and in the slow, agonizing erosion of my own life to sustain someone else's. When my mother, Elena, was diagnosed with a complex autoimmune condition 2 years ago, the family dynamic did not just shift, it hardened into stone. The illness was severe, a roller coaster of flare-ups that required constant monitoring. My father, Gordon, was a man who built skyscrapers but could not handle the sight of vulnerability. He retreated into his office, burying himself in blueprints, treating his wife's illness like a construction delay, something annoying that he could ignore until it fixed itself. Miles did not even pretend to care. He was too busy expanding the network and playing the role of the heir apparent. So, the duty fell to me. It always falls to the daughter. I moved back home. I did not do it because I wanted to live in my childhood bedroom at 32 years old. I did it because there was no other option. I cut my hours at Cedar Ridge Wellness Center from full-time to part-time per diem. That decision cost me roughly 40% of my annual income. It cost me my seniority. It cost me the ability to save for a down payment on a house for Ryan and myself. But in the Rivera household, my sacrifice was not viewed as a gift. It was viewed as an expectation. I was the support system. I was the unpaid staff. The house changed during those 2 years. It stopped smelling like lemon polish and old paper. It began to smell of antiseptic, saline solution, and the peculiar, earthy scent of the dried herbs Mom insisted on keeping by her bedside. She believed in the combination of Western medicine and her own garden remedies. I would administer her corticosteroids in the morning, and by afternoon, I would be steeping sage and thyme from the backyard to soothe her throat. My life became a rhythm of medical logistics: 800 hours vitals, 900 hours breakfast and medication, 1,200 hours physical therapy exercises in the living room, 1,400 hours nebulizer treatment. I was not just a daughter anymore. I was a live-in nurse, a case manager, and a housekeeper. Ryan was the only reason I did not collapse. My husband, the man my family dismissed as blue-collar help, stepped up in ways that should have shamed my father and brother. Ryan was the one who drove over after his 12-hour shift at the ambulance depot to cook dinner because I was too exhausted to stand. He was the one who carried Mom up the stairs on the days her joints were too swollen to manage the steps. He was the one who drove to the 24-hour pharmacy at 3 a.m. when her fever spiked, and yet he was treated like a ghost. I remember one evening when Ryan was in the kitchen, fixing a leaky faucet that Dad had been promising to repair for 6 months. Dad walked in, poured himself a coffee, and stepped right around Ryan without saying a word, as if Ryan were just another appliance. He did not say thank you. He did not acknowledge the labor. In my father's eyes, and by extension in Miles's eyes, Ryan was just there to serve the Rivera Empire. He was useful, but he was not equal. Then there were the visits from Miles. In 2 full years, 730 days, my brother visited our mother exactly 3 times. I remember every single one of them because they were masterclasses in narcissism. The first visit was 6 months into her illness. Miles swept in wearing a camel hair coat, looking like he had just stepped out of a magazine shoot. He did not bring flowers. He did not bring food. He brought a folder of documents. He sat by Mom's bed for 15 minutes. He did not ask about her pain levels. He did not ask about the new treatment protocol. He asked about the deed to the lake property. He wanted to know if the title was clean because he was thinking of using it as collateral for a business loan. He spoke over her, talking about leveraging assets and market timing. Mom just nodded, her face pale against the pillows, and told him it was handled. He patted her hand, told her she looked rested, and left. He checked the thermostat on his way out to make sure we were not wasting money on heat. The second visit was a year later. Mom was having a good week. She was sitting in the sunroom, watching the birds. Miles arrived, again with no warning. He walked around the perimeter of the house before he even came inside. When he finally sat down with her, the first thing he said was not, "I love you." He said, "The roof looks like it might need work in 5 years. We should probably look into that before it affects the appraisal value." I was standing in the doorway with a tray of tea, and my hands shook so hard the cups rattled. He was looking at our mother, who was fighting for her life, and all he saw was a depreciating asset. He was calculating maintenance costs on a property he was already mentally liquidating. The third visit was 3 months ago. This was the shortest one. He stood in the foyer, refusing to take off his shoes. He asked Mom where the safe deposit box keys were kept. He said it was just for safekeeping in case of an emergency. Mom told him they were in the study. He went to the study, stayed there for 20 minutes, and then left without saying goodbye. Talia came once. That was perhaps the most insulting afternoon of the entire 2 years. She arrived in her SUV, smelling of expensive perfume that made Mom cough. She did not sit down. She walked through the house with her phone held up, recording a video. She narrated it as she walked, talking to an invisible audience. "So much potential here," she said, panning the camera over the living room. "These floors are original hardwood, with a little sanding and a modern stain. They would be stunning, and this layout, it is totally open concept ready." She walked into the kitchen where I was preparing Mom's lunch. She turned the camera on me for a split second, then turned it back to the cabinets. "Authentic vintage charm," she chirped, "but definitely a gut renovation." She was creating a before video for a renovation project. She was not visiting a sick relative. She was scouting a flip. Before she left, she asked me, "Have you checked the comps in the neighborhood lately? The market is really heating up. This place, if kept in good condition, is going to be a gold mine." I looked at her, holding a blender full of kale and protein powder, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that this house was not a gold mine. It was a home. It was where my mother was fighting to survive. But I said nothing. I just nodded, because that is what I was trained to do. But amidst the indignity, there were moments of clarity. My mother, Elena, was physically weak, but her mind was sharpening in the silence. There were afternoons when she would ask me to drive her downtown. She would tell me she had appointments with a specialist for her condition, or that she needed to sort out some insurance paperwork at the main office. These trips were grueling for her. Getting dressed exhausted her. The car ride made her nauseous, but she insisted. I would drop her off in front of a nondescript pre-war building in the legal district. It was not a medical center. It was an office block filled with title companies and law firms. Insurance, she would say, clutching her purse with a grip that turned her knuckles white. Just standard bureaucratic nonsense. Sailor. Go get a coffee. Come back in an hour. I never questioned her. I was so burnt out, so tired from the 24-hour care cycle, that an hour of sitting in a coffee shop staring at the wall felt like a vacation. I did not want to know about insurance. I just wanted to close my eyes. When she would come out of that building, she always looked different. Physically, she was drained, often leaning heavily on her cane. But emotionally, she looked lighter. It was as if she had walked in carrying a boulder and walked out carrying a feather. There was a resolve in her eyes, a secret satisfaction that I could not place. One evening, after one of these trips, Ryan helped me get her into bed after she fell asleep. We sat on the porch, sharing a single beer. Do you think she is hiding something? Ryan asked. She is not going to an insurance broker. Sailor, that building is full of attorneys. Maybe she is updating the life insurance, I said, rubbing my temples. Or maybe she just wants to get out of the house. Let her have her secrets. Ryan, she has nothing else. I do not know, Ryan said, looking up at the dark window of her bedroom. Your mother is quiet, but she sees everything. She sees how Miles treats her. She sees how he looks at this house. I think she is planning something. I shook my head. I could not let myself believe that. To believe that would mean admitting that my mother knew her own son was a vulture. It was too painful to acknowledge out loud. She is just tired. Ryan, we all are. But then came the warning. It was 3 days before the accident. The accident that took both my parents was sudden, but in a strange way. Mom had been saying goodbye for weeks. We were in the garden. It was a rare, warm day in winter, a false spring. She was sitting in her wheelchair, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching the dead hydrangeas. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves was strong. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was paper-thin, cold to the touch. Sailor, she said. Her voice was raspy, but clear. You have been good. You have been so good. I am just doing what I should. Mom, I said, adjusting her blanket. No, she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. You did what was right. There is a difference. She looked toward the house, then back at me. Her eyes were intense, dark and urgent. Listen to me. If the day comes when you are pushed out, when the doors are closed to you, Mom, do not talk like that. No one is closing doors. He will, she said. She did not say Miles's name, but she did not have to. He will try to take what he thinks is his, and when that happens, Sailor, I want you to promise me something. Anything. Do not beg, she hissed. Do not ask him for mercy. Do not ask him for a penny. If you are pushed out, you just go. You walk away, and you go to the right place. What is the right place? I asked, confused. She just smiled, a small, tired, enigmatic smile. You will know. When the time comes, you will know. Just remember, I saw it coming, and I did not leave you defenseless. I thought she was delirious. I thought it was the medication talking, or the fear of death making her paranoid. I brushed it off. I helped her inside, made her tea, and put her to bed. I did not know that was the last real conversation we would ever have. 3 days later, she and Dad were on Interstate 70, and the black ice took them both. Now, sitting in the kitchen of my friend Megan's house. 2 years of memories crashed down on me. I was wearing borrowed sweatpants. My hair was still damp from the rain where Miles had left me. Ryan was sitting across from me, his face grim, watching my hands. The envelope lay on the table between us. It was the only thing we had saved from the wreckage of my life on the porch. The cream-colored paper was slightly warped from the moisture, but the seal was unbroken. Sailor. That was all it said on the front. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely get a grip on the paper. I felt sick. I felt terrified. Opening this felt like summoning a ghost. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, covered in that familiar, shaky script. I unfolded it. The light from Megan's kitchen pendant lamp hit the page. I read the first line, and the air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a term of endearment. It was a confirmation of a war I hadn't realized I was fighting. My dearest sailor, if you are reading this, it means Miles has done exactly what I predicted he would do. I looked up at Ryan. My vision blurred. Mom hadn't just been sick. She hadn't just been dying. She had been waiting, and from the grave, she had just handed me a loaded gun. The letter in my hands was not a suicide note, nor was it a sentimental goodbye. It was a tactical dossier. The paper was thick, slightly textured, the kind my mother used to keep in her top desk drawer for thank you notes. But the words scrawled across it did not say thank you. They were directives. Her handwriting, usually so elegant and looped, was jagged here. I could see the tremors in the ink, the places where the pen had pressed too hard and nearly torn the fiber. It was the writing of a woman who knew she was running out of time and needed to be understood with absolute clarity. There was a name at the top, underlined twice, Noelle Hart. I stared at it. I knew the name, but only vaguely. Noelle Hart was a legend in the St. Louis legal circles, but not the kind my father associated with. My father liked lawyers who were loud, who played golf, and who slapped backs. Noelle Hart was known for estate planning and high-stakes trusts. She was known for being quiet, expensive, and lethal. Below the name, my mother's instructions were short, bulleted commands. Do not fight him in the driveway. Do not sign anything he hands you. Do not send angry texts. Just go to Noelle. And then, the line that made my breath hitch in my throat. Your reaction is the currency they are waiting for. Do not pay them. I looked up from the paper. We were in the living room of Megan Price's house. Megan was a fellow nurse at Cedar Ridge, a woman who had seen me at my best during Code Blues and was now seeing me at my absolute lowest. She had not asked a single question when I showed up at her door soaking wet at midnight. She had simply unlocked the door, pointed to the pull-out couch, and handed me a heavy wool blanket and a bottle of water. She was in the kitchen now, making tea, giving us space. Ryan was pacing the small room like a caged animal. His hands were balling into fists, releasing, and balling again. The adrenaline of the eviction was turning into a dark, simmering rage. I am going back there, Ryan said, his voice tight. I am going to kick that door in. He cannot do this. Sailor, it is illegal. It is theft. Your whole life is in that house. No, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow but steady. Sailor, he threw you out in the rain. He cannot get away with this. We need to call the cops. We need to go back there and force him to let us in. Ryan, stop, I said. I held up the letter. Read this. He stopped pacing and snatched the paper from my hand. His eyes scanned the page, his brow furrowing as he read Mom's shaky script. He read it once, then again. The tension in his shoulders didn't disappear, but it shifted. The chaotic energy of a street fight was replaced by the cold realization of a conspiracy. She knew, Ryan whispered. She knew he would do exactly this. She said not to react, I said, pointing to the line. If we go back there screaming, if we call the police and make a scene on the lawn, we give him exactly what he wants. He wants to paint me as the hysterical sister. He wants to tell the neighbors and the family that I am unstable, that I am difficult, that he had to remove me for the good of the estate. Ryan looked at me, his eyes searching mine. So we just let him win. No, I said, folding the letter carefully and sliding it back into the envelope. We do exactly what the general ordered. We go to Noelle Hart. I did not sleep that night. I lay on Megan's couch, listening to the wind rattle the window panes, thinking about the woman who had written that letter. Who was she? The mother I knew was gentle. She planted lavender. She baked bread. She smoothed over arguments. But the woman who wrote this letter was a strategist. She was a woman who had spent years sleeping next to a man who dismissed her and raising a son who devalued her. And somewhere in that silence, she had sharpened a blade. The next morning, the sun came up bright and cruel, illuminating the wreckage of the night before. I went out to Ryan's car to inspect the boxes we had managed to salvage. In the daylight, the damage was not just a mess, it was a tragedy. The cardboard had dissolved into mush. I peeled back the lid of the top box and felt my heart crack. It was my professional archive. My nursing degree, framed in simple black wood, was waterlogged. The paper had warped and rippled, the gold seal peeling away from the backing. The ink on my transcripts had bled into indecipherable blue clouds. Next to it was a photo album. I tried to open it, but the pages were stuck together. I peeled one back carefully, and the image tore. It was a picture of me and Mom on my graduation day. Her face was gone, peeled away by the dampness, leaving only a white void where her smile used to be. I stood there in Megan's driveway, holding the ruined photo. A strange calmness settled over me. It was the calmness of absolute clarity. Miles had not just evicted me to sell a house. If he just wanted to sell, he could have waited a week. He could have let me pack. This was not about real estate. This was an erasure. He wanted to scrub the house clean of any evidence that I had ever lived there, that I had ever cared for it, that I had ever mattered. He wanted to reset the timeline to a version where he was the only Rivera child, the only one who existed. "Okay," I said aloud to the empty street. "Okay, Miles." I went back inside, showered, and put on the only dry clothes I had, a pair of black slacks and a sweater I had left in the back seat of my car weeks ago. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I did not look like a victim. I looked like someone going to work. We drove into the city. The Hart and Price Legal Group was located in Clayton, in a building that screamed old money. It was not a glass and steel skyscraper. It was a limestone fortress with polished brass railings and a doorman who looked like he used to be in the Secret Service. The lobby smelled of leather and expensive coffee. When I gave my name to the receptionist, a young woman with glasses who looked terrified of making a mistake. Her eyes widened slightly. "Ms. Rivera," she said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Yes, Ms. Hart has cleared her morning schedule for you." "She has?" I asked. I had not even called. "She told us to expect you," the receptionist said. "She said you would come within 48 hours of the funeral." A chill went down my spine. Mom's planning had been precise down to the hour. We were ushered into a corner office that looked less like a workspace and more like a library. The walls were lined with books that looked like they had actually been read. The view out the window was of the St. Louis skyline, gray and imposing. Noelle Hart was standing by the window. She turned when we entered. She was a striking woman, perhaps in her late 60s, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and a suit that cost more than my car. She did not smile. She did not offer condolences. She looked at me with an intensity that made me feel like I was being X-rayed. "Sailor," she said. Her voice was low, raspy, and commanded instant attention. "And Ryan." She knew my husband's name. That alone was more than my father had bothered to remember half the time. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to 2 leather chairs in front of her massive mahogany desk. We sat. I placed the envelope on the desk between us. Noelle looked at it, and for a fleeting second, the steel in her eyes softened. She reached out and touched the wax seal with her fingertip, a gesture of reverence. "I see you found the failsafe," Noelle said. "My brother locked me out," I said. "Last night, he changed the locks and threw my things in the rain." Noelle nodded slowly, as if I were confirming a weather report she had already read. "Miles, predictable. He lacks imagination. He always goes for the brute force option." "Can we stop him?" Ryan asked, leaning forward. Can we get an emergency injunction? He is throwing away her property. Noelle sat back in her chair, interlacing her fingers. I could have a judge sign an order by lunch. We could have the sheriff there by 2 o'clock to cut those locks off. Then do it, Ryan said. No, Noelle said. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Why not? I asked. He stole my home. Noelle looked at me. Sailor, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have been waiting for this call for nearly 10 years. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 10 years. But Mom only got sick 2 years ago. Your mother came to me long before she got sick, Noelle said. She came to me shortly after your father made Miles the vice president of operations. She saw the writing on the wall. She knew that Gordon was blinded by his ego and that Miles was morally flexible. She knew that one day, you would be the target. I sat back, stunned, for a decade, while I was struggling through nursing school, while I was worrying about Mom's silence at the dinner table. She had been coming here. She had been building a fortress around me that I could not even see. The will reading is scheduled for next Tuesday, Noelle said. That is 5 days from now. So I am homeless for 5 days, I asked. You are not homeless, Noelle corrected. You are in exile. There is a difference. And this exile is necessary. Why? Because Miles needs to feel safe, Noelle said, her eyes narrowing. He needs to believe he has won. He needs to believe that you are crushed, that you are weak, and that you have given up. When a man like Miles feels safe, he gets sloppy. He starts spending money he does not have. He starts making promises he cannot keep. He starts bragging. She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto mine. If we kick down the door today, he goes on the defensive. He lawyers up. He hides assets. He destroys documents. But if we let him sit in that house for 5 days, thinking he is the King of England, he will dig his own grave. But the locks, I said, thinking of the shiny silver metal. He is destroying Mom's things. He is destroying the decoys, Noelle said mysteriously. The things that matter are not where he thinks they are. She opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. For the next 5 days, you do nothing. You stay with your friend. You ignore his texts. If he offers you money, you do not take it. If he threatens you, you do not respond. You document everything, but you say nothing. It feels like surrendering, Ryan said, his jaw tight. It is not surrender, Noelle said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It is an ambush. She stood up, signaling the meeting was over. She walked us to the door. Before I stepped out, she placed a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm. Sailor, when you walk into that conference room next Tuesday, I do not want you to look like the grieving daughter. I want you to look like someone who has nothing left to lose, because those are the people who are truly dangerous. And Miles, I asked, what happens to him? Noelle allowed herself a very small, very cold smile. You let him enjoy his new keys, she said. Let him think he owns the castle. History is full of kings who lost their heads because they underestimated the people outside the gates. People like Miles, they usually sign their own death warrants. We are just going to hand him the pen. We walked out of the office and into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing us in silence. I looked at the digital display as the numbers counted down. 10 years. My mother had been playing a long game for 10 years. I thought about Miles, probably walking through the house right now, measuring the windows for new drapes, maybe pouring himself a drink from Dad's crystal decanter. He thought he had erased me. I took Ryan's hand. He squeezed it hard. We wait, I said. Ryan nodded. We wait. The elevator dinged at the lobby. The sound was sharp and final. The mourning period was over. The siege had begun. The waiting was a physical thing. It felt like holding your breath underwater, waiting for your lungs to burn. For 3 days. I stayed in the guest room of Megan Price's house, living out of a suitcase, jumping every time my phone vibrated. I was following Noelle Hart's orders. I was the silent fortress. I was the ghost at the feast. But silence makes people nervous, especially people with guilty consciences. It was 11:30 at night, 3 days before the scheduled will reading. The house was quiet. Ryan was asleep next to me, his breathing a steady rhythm that usually comforted me. But tonight I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the shadows. My phone lit up on the nightstand. I knew who it was before I even looked. A gut instinct, a vibration in the blood. I picked it up. Miles. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the decline button. Noelle had said to document everything. She had not explicitly forbidden me from answering, but she had warned me not to engage. But there is a difference between engaging and listening. I needed to know the temperature of the water. I needed to know how scared he was. I slid the bar to answer and put it on speaker. I motioned to Ryan, who woke up instantly, his eyes alert. I put a finger to my lips. "Hello, Miles," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the shivering terror he had heard on the porch. "Sailor," he said. His voice was unrecognizable. The cold, metallic edge from the other night was gone. In its place was a warm, syrupy tone, the voice he used when he was trying to charm a zoning commissioner or convince a client that going over budget was actually a feature, not a bug. "I am glad you picked up. I was worried about you." I almost laughed. "Worried? Is that why you changed the locks?" "Look, let us not rehash that," he said, dismissing the eviction like it was a minor misunderstanding about dinner plans. I was stressed. The grief. The funeral arrangements, I acted rashly. I want to apologize for the execution. Sailor, I really do. I was just trying to secure the asset for the family. I am the family. Miles, I said. Exactly, he said quickly. Exactly. That is why I am calling. I have been doing some thinking. We do not need to drag this out. Do you know what I mean? Lawyers, courts, judges, it is messy. It is expensive. Mom and Dad would hate to see us fighting over scraps in a courtroom. I looked at Ryan. He rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. What are you proposing? Miles, I asked. I want to make you an offer, he said. A settlement, just between us siblings, no suits involved. I heard a rustle on the other end of the line. He was not alone. I am listening, I said. I know things have been tight for you and Ryan, Miles said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I know nursing does not pay a fortune. And Ryan? Well, I know you guys are renting, so here's the deal. I am willing to cut you a check for $15,000. Silence stretched across the line. $15,000. It was a number that sounded large if you were 19 years old, but for a woman in her 30s who had just lost her inheritance, her home, and 2 years of income potential. It was an insult. It was less than the cost of the new siding Miles had put on his own garage last summer. $15,000, I repeated, keeping my voice flat. Cash, Miles emphasized. Immediate transfer. Tomorrow morning. You can use it to put a down deposit on a nice apartment. Get yourself some new furniture. Start fresh. All you have to do is sign a simple waiver. Just a standard document stating that you accept this sum in lieu of any further claims on the estate. It is a clean break. Sailor, a fresh start. A clean break, I echoed. We just want things tidy. The second voice came from the background, sharp and impatient. It was Talia. She must have been listening on the other end. Unable to keep quiet, Miles had her on speaker too. Tidy? I said. Is that what I am? Talia? A mess you need to clean up. Don't be dramatic. Sailor, Talia snapped. Her voice was closer now. She had probably grabbed the phone. We are offering you a lifeline. We know you do not have the money for a legal battle. Miles is being generous. The house is going to probate. It will be tied up for months, maybe years. You will get nothing but bills. Take the $15,000 and move on with your life. It is the smart play. The arrogance was breathtaking. They truly believed I was desperate. They believed that $15,000 was enough to buy my silence because they could not imagine a world where I had any other value. They were trying to buy a house worth $500,000 for the price of a used sedan. You are right, I said slowly. Legal battles are expensive. Exactly, Miles said, regaining control of the call. Why give the money to the lawyers? Let us keep it in the family. So, can I have my attorney email over the waiver? I can have a courier bring the check to wherever you are crashing. He did not even know where I was. He did not care. I looked at the envelope sitting on the nightstand the one Noelle Hart now had in her safe. I thought about the insurance Mom had mentioned. No, Miles, I said. The silence on the other end was heavy. Excuse me, he said, his tone hardening. I said no, I said clearly. I do not want $15,000, and I am not signing anything. Sailor, do not be an idiot, Miles hissed. The mask of the benevolent brother slipped, revealing the desperate, angry man beneath. You are making a mistake. You have no claim. Dad's will is clear. I am trying to save you from humiliation. If the will is so clear, I asked, why are you offering me cash 3 days before the reading? I am trying to help you, he shouted. You ungrateful little... I will see you at the reading. Miles, I said. If you hang up, Miles said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl. Do not expect me to be nice anymore. You think being locked out was bad? You have no idea what I can do. I can make your life very difficult. Sailor, very difficult. Good night, Miles, I said. I hung up. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. $15,000, Ryan said in the dark. He must be terrified. He is broke, I said, realizing it for the first time with absolute certainty. He does not have the money to buy me out properly. That is all the cash he could scrape together. He is desperate. I slept soundly for the rest of the night, but Miles Rivera was not a man who took rejection well. I had refused the carrot. So, the next morning, he brought out the stick. I was scheduled for the morning shift at Cedar Ridge. I walked in at 7 o'clock. Steeling myself for a normal day, I needed the routine. I needed the smell of sanitizer and the familiar beep of the monitors. I needed to remember who I was outside of this family drama. I was checking the charts at the nurses' station when my supervisor, Mrs. Gable, walked up. Mrs. Gable was a woman I had worked with for 6 years. She was strict, fair, and usually greeted me with a nod and a comment about the weather. Today, she did not look at me. She looked at the floor. Sailor, she said, her voice tight. Can you come to my office now? I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. Is something wrong? Is it a patient? Just come to the office, please. I followed her down the hallway. The walk felt incredibly long. When we entered her office, the director of human resources was sitting there. The blinds were drawn. Sit down, Sailor, the HR director said. I sat. What is going on? The director slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of an email. We received an anonymous tip via our compliance hotline this morning, the director said. It concerns a serious allegation regarding the handling of narcotics on your shift. I stared at her, my mouth falling open. What? The email alleges that you have been diverting pain medication, the director said, her voice mechanical. Specifically, that you have been documenting dosages that were not administered and pocketing the difference. It also mentions erratic behavior and financial distress. My blood ran cold. Financial distress. That was the phrase Miles had used. This is a lie, I said, my voice rising. I have never stolen a pill in my life. You can check the Pyxis logs. You can check the waste disposal records. I have a witness for every waste. We are going to check everything, Mrs. Gable said, looking pained. But Sailor, the accusation is specific, and given the personal difficulties you have been having. Personal difficulties? I asked. You mean my parents dying? The email mentioned that you were recently evicted and are in desperate need of money, the HR director said. It paints a picture of someone under extreme pressure. I looked at the paper. I did not need to read it to know who wrote it. It was sophisticated. It used the right buzzwords: patient safety, diversion, ethics. It was designed to trigger an immediate, mandatory investigation. "My brother," I said, feeling sick. "My brother sent this. He is trying to blackmail me." The HR director looked skeptical. "Sailor, we have to follow protocol. We have to open an internal review until the investigation is complete. We have to place you on administrative leave, pending the results." "Administrative leave." I stood up. "You are suspending me over an anonymous email." "It is policy," the director said. "Surrender your badge, please." I walked out of Cedar Ridge 20 minutes later. I was carrying my personal items in a plastic bag. For the second time in a week, I was being escorted off a property that I considered home. I sat in my car in the parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Tears of frustration pricked my eyes. He had attacked my home. Now he was attacking my livelihood. He knew that if he cut off my income and threatened my license, I would break. He thought I would come crawling back, begging to sign his waiver just to make the pain stop. He was trying to starve me out. I pulled out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen. I texted Noel Hart. He offered $15,000. I refused. Now I am suspended from work. False accusation of drug theft. Anonymous tip. I stared at the screen, waiting. I expected her to tell me to panic. I expected her to tell me to sue for defamation immediately. The 3 dots bubbled up. Then the message appeared. "Good." I blinked. "Good." A second message followed. "He is escalating. That means he is out of options. He just created a paper trail of malice that we can use to impeach his character in probate court. Do not resign. Do not talk to colleagues. Save the emails. Save the voicemail if he left one. He thinks he is breaking you. In reality, he is handing us the hammer." I took a deep breath. The air in the car felt stale, but my head was clearing. Miles had made a tactical error. He thought he was dealing with his little sister, the pushover nurse. He thought that by attacking my integrity, he would shame me into submission. But he had forgotten one thing about nurses. We deal with trauma every day. We deal with people screaming, bleeding, and dying. We are not easily scared. And when someone threatens our patients or our license, we do not shrink. We document. We report. We fight. I started the car. I was not going to go back to Megan's and cry. I was going to the library. I was going to print out every bank statement, every text message, and every interaction I had with Miles in the last 2 years. Talia wanted things tidy. Miles wanted a clean break. I was going to make sure that when Tuesday came, the mess I dumped on that conference table would stain them forever. The suspension from Cedar Ridge Wellness Center felt like an amputation. It was not just a job. It was the one place where I knew exactly who I was. I was Nurse Rivera. I was competent. I was trusted. In the span of 48 hours, Miles had managed to strip that identity away, replacing it with a question mark. I spent the next 2 days in a state of restless purgatory at Megan's house. The investigation was ongoing, which meant I had to answer calls from a compliance officer who asked me humiliating questions about my personal finances. "Ms. Rivera, have you engaged in any high-stakes gambling recently?" "Ms. Rivera, are you currently behind on any significant loan payments?" They were painting a portrait of a desperate addict, a woman who would steal Percocet to pay the rent, and every time I hung up the phone, shaking with rage, I knew exactly whose brushstrokes were on the canvas. Ryan, however, was not paralyzed by the humiliation. He was energized by it. While I sat at Megan's kitchen table, staring at my deactivated ID badge, Ryan was building a timeline on a notepad. He looked like a detective working a cold case, his eyes bloodshot from a double shift but sharp with focus. "Look at this," Ryan said, tapping the paper with his pen. "Miles called you at 11:30 at night on Friday. That was the settlement offer. You said no. You hung up around 11:40. So?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "The anonymous email was sent to your HR department's tip line at 7:45 the next morning," Ryan said. "That is barely 8 hours later. And look at the phrasing. Sailor, The compliance officer read you some of it, right? Financial distress, erratic behavior. Those are the exact buttons Miles pushed on the phone. He did not even sleep on it. He got off the phone with you, realized his bribe failed, and immediately went to the nuclear option. It proves he is malicious, I said. But it does not prove he is broke. It just proves he is cruel. Cruelty requires energy, Ryan countered. Calculated cruelty requires motive. He is not just trying to hurt you for sport. He is trying to discredit you. He wants to make sure that if you do walk into a courtroom, you look like a disgruntled, drug-addicted employee, not a credible heir. He is building a narrative. Megan, who was brewing a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, set a mug down in front of me. Then you need to build a better one, she said. Sailor, you are sitting here letting him punch you. Stop taking the hits. Start looking for the glass jaw. I do not know where to look, I admitted. Start with the money, Megan said. Rich people leave trails. If he is as desperate as you think, it will show up somewhere. She was right. I opened my laptop. I did not have access to Miles's bank accounts, but I had access to something almost as telling the internet. I started with the basics. I went to the county property records. Miles lived in a sprawling mock Tudor house in Ladue, one of the wealthiest zip codes in Missouri. I pulled up the tax records. He was behind. He had missed the last 2 property tax payments. There was a lien notification filed 6 months ago. My heart started to pound. I switched tabs to Zillow. I searched for his address. It was not listed for sale. But then I searched for his investment property, a sleek, modern condo in downtown Clayton that he liked to brag about at Christmas parties. He called it his passive income stream. There it was. But it was not listed on the open market. It was on a Make Me Move pre-listing status. And the price history was telling. It had been listed quietly 3 months ago for $600,000. 2 weeks ago, the price had dropped to $550,000. Yesterday, the day after he evicted me, it had dropped to $490,000. He is fire selling, I whispered. Ryan leaned over my shoulder. That is a 20% drop. You do not drop a property 20% in a seller's market unless you need cash by the end of the week. He needs the cash to pay off the debts before the estate settles. I realized. He thought he could use Dad's money to plug the holes. But probate takes too long. He is drowning. Ryan, he is absolutely drowning. I kept scrolling. Once you start pulling a thread, the whole sweater unravels. I went to Instagram. I had unfollowed Talia years ago for my own mental health, but her profile was public. Talia Wexler lived her life for the audience. Her feed was a meticulously curated gallery of beige aesthetics and forced joy. But if you looked past the filters, the cracks were visible. 3 days ago, she posted a photo of a glass of white wine next to a burning sage bundle. The caption read, "Protecting my peace. Sometimes the people you think are family are the ones holding the knife, learning to breathe when others try to destroy your future. Self-care. Toxic people rising above." She is talking about me, I said, pointing at the screen. She is talking about her fear, Ryan corrected. Look at the comments. I scrolled down. Most were generic heart emojis from other trophy wives. But one comment from a local boutique owner stood out. Hope everything is okay. Hun, let me know about that invoice when you can. It was a public dun, a bill collector masquerading as a friend. Talia hadn't deleted it yet, which meant she was too overwhelmed to even manage her image. They are broke, I said, sitting back in my chair. The realization washed over me, cold and sobering. The cars, the trips, the parties, it is all debt. That is why he needs the house. It is not about tradition. It is about liquidity. If he gets the house, he can leverage it immediately. He can get a bridge loan. And if he doesn't get the house, Ryan asked, then the house of cards falls down. I said. The phone rang. It was Noelle Hart's office. Ms. Rivera, the assistant said. Ms. Hart would like to see you tomorrow morning. Briefly. Before the reading on Tuesday. Is everything okay? I asked. my stomach tightening. She just wants to prepare you. We went back to the limestone fortress the next morning. The waiting room was quiet. When we walked into Noelle's office, the atmosphere was different. There was no coffee on the desk. Noelle was standing by the window again, looking out at the gray city. "Sit," she said. We sat. Noelle turned around. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp as flint. "I have the final guest list for the reading on Tuesday," Noelle said. "I wanted to warn you so you do not react in the room." "Who is coming?" I asked. "Besides Miles and Talia." "There will be a representative from First National Bank," Noelle said. "Mr. Henderson. He is the trustee for the corporate accounts." "Okay," I said. "That makes sense for Dad's business." "And," Noelle paused, watching me closely, "there will be a woman named Judith Langford." I frowned. The name triggered a faint, dusty memory. Judith. I think that is my mother's mother, my grandmother. But I have not seen her since I was 5 years old. Mom never talked about her. I thought they were estranged. "They were," Noelle said. "Or rather, your father ensured they were. Gordon did not like Judith. She was too opinionated, too independent. He gave Elena an ultimatum early in the marriage, him or her family. Elena chose to keep the peace. So why is she coming now?" "Because your mother asked her to," Noelle said. "Judith has been executed as a secondary witness to the final codicil. Her presence is necessary to validate the timeline." I felt a wave of sadness. My mother had reconnected with her own mother in secret, probably during those insurance trips, and I had never known. "There is one more thing," Noelle said. She walked around the desk and leaned against the edge, looking down at me. "Sailor, on Tuesday, you are going to hear things that will make you want to stand up and scream. You are going to hear Miles lie. You are going to hear him characterize your mother's wishes in ways that are offensive. You are going to hear him dismiss you." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You must not react," she commanded. "If you cry, he wins. If you shout, he wins. If you walk out of that room, he wins. You sit there. You fold your hands, and you let him talk. Can you do that?" "I do not know," I said honestly. "He is destroying my reputation. He got me suspended." "I know," Noelle said, "and we will deal with that. But the will reading is a performance. Sailor, Miles thinks he is the director. You need to let him believe that until the final curtain drops." "What happens when the curtain drops?" Ryan asked. Noelle's face remained impassive. "Then we turn on the house lights and see what is really on the stage." We left the office in silence. The city felt heavy, the air thick with impending storms. That night, the night before the reading, was the longest of my life. I lay in bed next to Ryan, staring at the shadows. The digital clock read 3 in the morning. "Are you awake?" Ryan whispered. "Yes." He turned on his side, draping an arm over me. "Are you afraid?" I thought about the question. Was I afraid of being poor? I was already poor. Was I afraid of losing my job? That damage was already done. "I am not afraid of Miles," I whispered. "I am afraid of hope." "What do you mean?" "I am afraid that Mom's plan, whatever it is, might not be enough," I said, my voice trembling. "I am afraid that I am pinning everything on a secret letter and a lawyer I barely know. If this fails, Ryan, if Miles wins, he takes everything. He takes the history. He takes the memories. He erases her." Ryan pulled me closer. "He can't erase her. We remember her." "That is not enough," I said fiercely. "She deserves justice. She spent 40 years being silenced. This is her chance to speak. I am terrified that no one will listen." My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text message. 3:14 in the morning. "Miles." I picked it up. The blue light illuminated the dark room. "I gave you a chance. Sailor, I tried to be the good brother. Tomorrow you are going to understand exactly how big of a mistake you made. Do not expect any mercy in that room. You chose this. I read the text twice. Ryan read it over my shoulder. He is trying to scare you. He wants you to walk in there shaking. I looked at the words. Do not expect mercy. It was meant to be a threat. It was meant to make me cower under the covers. But as I stared at the screen, a strange thing happened. The corner of my mouth twitched. Then it lifted. I smiled. Why are you smiling? Ryan asked. Concerned. Because, I said, tossing the phone back onto the nightstand. People who hold all the cards do not send threats at 3 a.m. Winners sleep. Ryan, winners are confident. I closed my eyes, picturing Miles in his big, empty house, pacing the floors, staring at his negative bank balances, terrifying himself with the possibility of failure. He was lashing out because he was cornered. He is not a monster, I whispered, pulling the blanket up to my chin. He is just a man who owes a lot of money. And tomorrow? Ryan asked. Tomorrow, I said. We collect? The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I fell asleep to the sound of the wind, dreaming of keys turning in locks. The conference room at the Hart and Price Legal Group was designed to intimidate. It was a long, cavernous space dominated by a table made of dark, polished mahogany that looked less like furniture and more like a slab of ancient stone. The walls were lined with leather-bound books that smelled of dust and authority, and the lighting was a stark, clinical white that cast no shadows, but revealed every flaw. It was a room where truth was not negotiated. It was surgically extracted. I walked in with Ryan at exactly 9:55 in the morning. I was wearing the same black slacks I had worn to the funeral, washed and pressed at Megan's house. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The panic of the last week had calcified into a cold, hard numbness. I was not here to grieve anymore. I was here to witness a demolition. Miles was already there. Of course he was. He sat at the head of the table, a position he had undoubtedly claimed the moment he walked in. He was wearing a navy blue suit that I recognized it was Italian, bespoke, the kind that cost more than my car. He looked immaculate. His hair was perfectly gelled, his jawline shaved close. He was projecting the image of the grieving but capable son, the captain steering the ship through the storm. He was typing on his phone, frowning with self-importance, as if he were closing a deal in Tokyo instead of waiting to carve up his parents' legacy. Talia sat to his right. She was using her phone as a shield. She held it high, scrolling through feeds with a manic intensity, her eyes never lifting to meet mine. She wore oversized sunglasses, even indoors, and a black dress that looked more appropriate for a cocktail party than a legal proceeding. She looked like a woman trying to hide in plain sight. When Ryan and I stepped fully into the room, the air pressure seemed to drop. Miles looked up. His eyes flicked to me, cold and assessing, and then they slid to Ryan. His expression curdled. It was a look of pure disdain, the look one gives to a stray dog that has wandered into a fine dining restaurant. "This is a private family matter," Miles said. His voice was smooth, the aggression wrapped in a layer of corporate politeness. "Counsel, I believe we established that only beneficiaries are required." He was looking at Noelle Hart, who was standing at the far end of the table, arranging a stack of files with precise, geometric movements. Noelle did not look up from her papers. "Mr. Hensley is the spouse of a beneficiary. His presence is permitted." "He is not a Rivera," Miles countered, leaning back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the mahogany. "I do not want outsiders hearing sensitive financial details. It is inappropriate." Ryan stiffened beside me. I felt his hand clench into a fist. I remembered Noelle's warning, "Do not react." I said nothing. I walked to the chairs on the opposite side of the table. Noelle finally looked up. Her gaze was level and unblinking. "Mr. Rivera, you are here as a guest of this firm until the proceedings begin. You do not dictate the seating chart. Ryan, please sit next to your wife." Miles's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Noelle's tone, a steeliness that brooked no debate, stopped him. He let out a sharp, dismissive breath, and turned his attention back to his phone. Fine, let us just get this over with. I have a lunch meeting at 12. I sat down. Ryan sat next to me. The table was wide, a vast expanse of wood separating us from Miles and Talia. It felt like a demilitarized zone. Noelle moved to the center of the room. She did not sit. She stood, commanding the space with a silence that forced everyone to stop fidgeting. She waited until Talia finally put her phone down, face up, on the table. "Good morning," Noelle said. "We are here to execute the final will and testament of Gordon Rivera and Elena Rivera." Miles waved a hand dismissively. "It is a standard mirror will. Mom and Dad had them drawn up 20 years ago, everything to the surviving spouse, and then to the children upon the second death. Can we skip the preamble? I have seen the drafts." "You have seen the drafts from 20 years ago," Noelle corrected him gently. "However, today we are reading two separate instruments, the last will and testament of Gordon Rivera, dated 4 years ago, and the last will and testament of Elena Rivera, dated 6 months ago." Miles froze. His hand stopped mid-drum on the table. "Two wills. They always did everything jointly. Why would there be two?" "Because they were two separate people," Noelle said, "with separate assets." "It is the same pot," Miles scoffed, recovering his composure. "It is community property. Gordon made the money, Elena kept the house. It is all one estate. 2 documents is just billing hours for you, isn't it?" Noelle ignored the insult. She looked at the door. "Before we begin, we have 2 additional parties joining us." Miles frowned. "What additional parties? There is no one else. I am the executor." The heavy oak door at the back of the room opened. The air in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't a draft. It was a sudden drop in temperature. An older woman walked in. She was using a cane, but she did not lean on it. She used it like a scepter. She was small, her hair pure white and pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a simple gray coat and sensible shoes. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were bright, hard, and terrifyingly familiar. It was Judith Langford, my grandmother. I felt a jolt of shock. I had not seen her since I was a child. Dad had banned her from the house after a shouting match one Thanksgiving about politics and money. He called her a meddling old witch. Mom had stopped mentioning her name to keep the peace. Miles stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, pointing a finger at Judith. "This is a closed meeting. She has been estranged from this family for 30 years. Judith stopped. She looked at Miles. She did not look angry. She looked at him with the kind of profound disappointment usually reserved for a structural failure. "Sit down, Miles," Judith said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that made the room feel smaller. "No," Miles snapped. "Noelle, get her out. She is not a beneficiary. She is not in the will. Dad hated her." "Your father's feelings are no longer relevant to these proceedings," Judith said, walking slowly to the empty chair at the end of the table, the head of the table opposite Miles. She sat down, placing her cane against the edge. "And I am not here for your father. I am here because my daughter requested it." "Your daughter?" Miles laughed. A harsh, barking sound. "You didn't even come to the hospital. You weren't at the funeral." "I was at the funeral," Judith said softly. "I stood in the back. I saw you checking your watch during the eulogy." Miles's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, sitting back down. "Fine. Let the old lady watch. It does not change the math." "And," Noelle continued, as if the outburst had not happened, "we are joined by Mr. Arthur Henderson." A man walked in behind Judith. He was the opposite of Miles, where Miles was flashy and aggressive. This man was gray suit, gray hair, gray demeanor. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. He nodded to the room and took a seat next to Judith. "Who is he?" Talia asked, speaking for the first time. Her voice was thin. She was looking at the briefcase. "Mr. Henderson represents the trust division of First Regional Bank, Noel said. The word trust hung in the air. I saw Talia's posture change. She sat up straighter. She took her sunglasses off. She knew, perhaps even better than Miles, what that word meant. Trust meant complexity. Trust meant assets that were locked away. Trust meant money that you could not just transfer to a checking account to pay off a maxed-out credit card. Miles looked at Mr. Henderson, then at Noel. Trust division. Dad didn't have a trust. He didn't believe in them. He said they were for people who didn't know how to manage their own cash flow. Mr. Henderson is not here for Gordon's estate, Noel said. She walked back to her desk and picked up a small object. It was a silver USB drive. She held it up so everyone could see it. Before we read the text, Noel said, her voice taking on a formal, legal cadence, I am placing this into evidence. This drive contains a video recording of the signing of Elena Rivera's will. It also contains a sworn affidavit from her primary care physician and a court-appointed psychiatrist attesting to her mental capacity on the date of signing. She placed the drive in the center of the table. It made a sharp clack sound against the wood. I am doing this, Noel continued, looking directly at Miles, to save us all time. Often, when a distribution of assets does not align with a beneficiary's expectations, there is a temptation to claim that the deceased was confused, or medicated, or coerced. This drive eliminates that argument. Elena Rivera was sound of mind. She was clear, and she was specific. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. I looked at Miles. For the last week, I had seen him as a monster. I had seen him as the tyrant who threw my boxes in the rain, the bully who tried to bribe me, the snake who reported me to the nursing board. I had seen him as a force of nature that I had to survive. But in that moment, under the harsh white lights of the conference room, the monster dissolved. I saw his eyes. They were fixed on the USB drive. They were wide, unblinking. His mouth was slightly open. His chest was rising and falling a little too fast. He was doing the math. He was calculating the presence of the estranged grandmother. He was factoring in the banker with the heavy briefcase. He was adding up the separate wills and the video evidence, and for the first time, he was getting a result he had not anticipated. He looked up, and his gaze met mine. The arrogance was gone. The smirk was wiped clean. In its place was something raw and pathetic. It was the look of a gambler who has pushed all his chips into the center of the table, only to realize, just as the cards are turning, that he has miscounted the deck. He looked like a man who was trying to remember if he had ever actually asked Mom what she wanted, or if he had just assumed she would fade into the wallpaper like she always did. He looked terrified. I held his gaze. I did not smile. I did not frown. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, breathing steadily. Shall we begin? Noel asked. Miles didn't answer. He couldn't. He just gave a jerky, spasmodic nod. Noel opened the first blue folder. We will begin with the last will and testament of Gordon Rivera. The room seemed to tighten, the walls closing in. The play had started, and the lead actor had just realized he didn't know his lines. Noel Hart opened the blue leather folder containing my father's will. The sound of the stiff cardboard bending against the table was the only noise in the room. It sounded like a gunshot in a canyon. I, Gordon Michael Rivera, being of sound mind and body, Noel began. Her voice was a monotone instrument, stripping the words of any sentimentality. She was not reading a letter from a father. She was reading a contract from a ghost. I watched Miles, as the familiar legal boilerplate washed over the room. His shoulders physically dropped 2 inches, the tension that had been holding him upright, that rigid, wire-tight anxiety I had seen earlier, began to dissolve. He knew this document. He had likely stood over my father's shoulder 20 years ago when the initial drafts were being discussed, whispering in his ear about legacy and continuity. This was his home turf. Article 3, Noel read, Distribution of business assets. Miles leaned back, crossing his legs. He shot a glance at Talia, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. It was the look of a man who was about to be vindicated. I hereby bequeath 100% of my controlling interest in Rivera Construction, including all heavy machinery, existing contracts, brand intellectual property, and operational accounts, to my son, Miles Gordon Rivera. Miles let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. Finally, he whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Okay, good. He looked at me. It was not a look of hatred anymore. It was a look of pity. It was the look a king gives to a peasant when he is feeling generous. He had the company. He had the cash flow. In his mind, the bleeding had stopped. The debts that were strangling him could now be serviced by the company accounts. He was safe. Noel continued. I grant Miles Rivera full authority to manage, sell, or expand these assets as he sees fit, trusting in his judgment to carry on the family name. Standard, Miles said, waving a hand. Move on. Noel paused. She looked at him over the rim of her reading glasses. Mr. Rivera, I am required by law to read the entirety of the dispositive provisions. Please refrain from interrupting. Miles rolled his eyes, but he stayed silent. He was winning, so he could afford to be patient. Article 4, Noel said. Personal effects and cash bequests. My stomach tightened. This was the part where I would be quantified. This was the part where my father decided exactly how much my 20 years of silence and 2 years of nursing care were worth in dollars and cents. To my daughter, Sailor Elena Rivera. Noel read. Miles smirked. He checked his cuticles. I bequeath the sum of $20,000. Noel read. $20,000? It was not nothing. But for a man whose company billed millions in revenue, it was a rounding error. It was the price of a used car. It was less than what Miles spent on his country club dues in a single year. And, Noel continued, I bequeath to her the contents of her mother's jewelry box, excluding any pieces purchased as investments, which shall remain part of the residuary estate. I felt a sting of tears, hot and sudden, even in death. He was controlling the narrative. He was giving me the trinkets, the emotional scraps, while keeping the investment pieces, the diamonds, the gold for the estate, for Miles. Miles turned to me. $20,000 is a nice cushion. Sailor, he said, his voice dripping with false benevolence. It should help you get settled in an apartment, maybe a studio. Thank you, Miles, I said. My voice was steady. I dug my fingernails into my palms under the table. Article 5, Noel read. The residuary estate. This was it. The catch-all. The clause that swept up everything not specifically mentioned the cars. The stocks, and most importantly, the house. All remaining property, real and personal, wheresoever situated, I give, devise, and bequeath to my son, Miles Rivera. Miles slapped the table, a sharp, victorious sound. Done, he said. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. That is it. The house is part of the residuary. It is mine, just like I told you. Sailor, tradition. He looked at Talia. Call the realtor. Tell them we are clear to list on Monday. Talia grabbed her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. The relief on her face was so naked it was almost obscene. They had survived. They had the house. They could sell it, take the $600,000 or whatever the market would bear, and pay off the loans that were threatening to drown them. Sit down, Mr. Rivera, Noel said. She had not closed the folder. I am done, Miles said, checking his watch. You read the residuary clause. That covers everything. I have a meeting. I have not read the codicil, Noel said. Miles froze. What codicil? A codicil dated 4 years ago, Noel said. Added at the insistence of your mother, but signed by your father. Dad didn't sign any codicils, Miles said, his eyes narrowing. He would have told me. Apparently not, Noel said. She looked down at the paper. Article 6, Interim housing provision, she read slowly, enunciating every syllable. Notwithstanding the provisions of the residuary estate, I hereby grant to my daughter, Sailor Rivera, a mandated right of occupancy in the primary family residence for a period of no less than 6 months following the death of the surviving spouse. During this period, the property cannot be listed for sale, encumbered, or altered without her express written consent. The room went dead silent. Miles looked like he had been slapped with a wet fish. What? Right of occupancy, Noelle repeated. It means Sailor has a legal right to reside in the house for 6 months. It is a cooling-off period. Your mother insisted on it to ensure Sailor would not be displaced abruptly. 6 months, Miles shouted. His voice cracked. I cannot wait 6 months, the market. He stopped himself. He realized he was revealing too much. I mean, it is inefficient. The house is empty. It is a waste of resources. It is not empty, Noelle said. Or it should not be. Sailor resides there. She does not reside there, Miles yelled. He pointed at me. She moved out. She vacated the premises last week. I did not vacate, I said. It was the first time I had spoken since the reading began. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his shouting. You changed the locks, Miles. You threw my things in the rain. She left voluntarily. Miles lied. He was sweating now. A sheen of perspiration appeared on his upper lip. I just secured the property after she left. Noelle looked at him. Her expression was one of mild intellectual curiosity, as if she were studying a particularly dull insect. Mr. Rivera, she said, did you, or did you not, engage a locksmith to alter the access to the property 3 days after the date of death? I am the executor, Miles blustered. I have the right to secure the assets. You are the executor nominee, Noelle corrected him. You do not have letters testamentary yet, and even if you did, you just heard the will. The will grants Sailor exclusive right of occupancy by changing the locks and removing her belongings. You have violated the express terms of the testator. You have acted ultra vires beyond your authority. So what? Miles sneered. Sue me. It is a civil matter. By the time it gets to court, the house will be sold. Actually, the gray man, Mr. Henderson, spoke up. His voice was dry, like shifting gravel. It is not just a civil matter. Mr. Rivera, it is a breach of fiduciary duty. Miles whirled on him. Who asked you? Breach of fiduciary duty, Noelle continued, is grounds for removal of an executor. If you have already demonstrated that you cannot follow the instructions of the will because of personal animus or financial desperation, the court will appoint an administrator, a third party. Miles went pale. You cannot remove me, he whispered. I am the son. And I am the lawyer who is recording this session, Noelle said. And I have your admission on tape that you violated Article 6. Ryan reached under the table and squeezed my hand. His grip was iron hard. I looked at Miles. He was vibrating with rage. He had thought the house was his ATM's. Now he was being told the ATM was locked for 6 months. 6 months he did not have. Fine, Miles spat. Fine, she can live there for 6 months. Whatever. We will list it as tenant occupied. We can still sell the contract. No, Noelle said. You cannot encumber the property. No listings. No loans against the equity. This is bullshit. Miles slammed his hand on the table. Dad would never agree to this. He built that house. He wanted me to have it. He wanted you to have the company, I said. He gave you the company, Miles. Isn't that enough? You shut up, he hissed at me. You do not understand business. The company has cash flow needs. We need the liquidity from the house to capitalize on new projects. To pay your debts, I corrected him. To capitalize, he screamed. Talia grabbed his arm. Her fingernails dug into his suit jacket. Miles, she whispered urgently. The deed. Ask about the deed. She looked at Noelle. Her voice was trembling. The will says the residuary estate goes to Miles. The house is in the residuary estate. So even if she lives there for 6 months, Miles still owns it, right? We can still use it as collateral for a bridge loan if we show ownership. It was a desperate, technical question. She was looking for a loophole, a way to borrow money against a house they could not sell yet. Noelle closed the blue folder. She placed her hands flat on the mahogany table. She looked from Miles to Talia, and then, for a brief moment, her eyes met mine. There was a flicker of something in them. Sadness. Triumph. I could not tell. That, Noelle said, is where your assumption encounters a fatal error. What assumption? Miles demanded. That Dad owned his own house. Gordon Rivera did not own the house at 4200 Oak Lane, Noelle said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. What? Miles whispered. Of course he did. He built it. He paid the mortgage. It is on the tax bill. The tax bill lists the Rivera Family Trust, Noelle said. Gordon was the trustee. But the deed, the actual legal title to the property. She reached for the second folder, the red one, the one marked Elena Rivera. 10 years ago, Noelle said, when Gordon's company was facing a liability lawsuit, a lawsuit you might remember, Miles, involving a structural collapse on the West Side project, Gordon panicked. He was terrified of losing his personal assets. So, on the advice of his then counsel, he transferred the title of the family home. He signed a quit-claim deed. Miles's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He transferred the house to his wife. Noelle said, to Elena, sole and separate property, to protect it from his creditors. But, Miles stammered, but the lawsuit was settled. He took it back. He intended to, Noelle said, but he never got around to the paperwork. He was busy. And Elena, she never reminded him. I stared at the red folder. My mother, my quiet, submissive mother. She had held the deed to the castle for 10 years, and she had never said a word. She had let Gordon stomp around like the king, knowing all the while that he was living in her queendom. So the house, Noelle said, was not Gordon's to give. It does not fall into his residuary estate. Article 5 of Gordon's will is irrelevant regarding the real estate. Because he did not own the real estate, Miles sank into his chair. He looked like a man who had just watched a bridge collapse while he was standing on it. Then whose is it? Talia whispered. Her voice was barely audible. If it was Elena's and she died, who gets it? Noelle opened the red folder. Now, she said, we will read the last will and testament of Elena Rivera. At the far end of the table, Judith Langford cleared her throat. It was a dry, rasping sound. She leaned forward, placing her withered hands on the dark wood. You boys always forgot about Elena, Judith said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a serrated knife. You thought she was just the woman who made the coffee. You thought she was furniture. Judith looked directly at Miles. But my daughter, she said, did not live her entire life to be treated like an ottoman in her own home. She knew who you were, Miles, and she knew exactly what you would do when she was gone. Miles looked at the red folder. He looked at the gray banker. He looked at the USB drive. And for the first time, he stopped calculating. He just started shaking. The silence in the conference room was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb has detonated, but before the dust has settled to reveal the casualties. Miles was staring at the red folder as if it were radioactive. Elena's will, he whispered, his voice cracking. But she didn't have anything. Dad handled the accounts. Dad handled the investments. She just had the checking account for the groceries. Noelle Hart did not respond immediately. She reached for the silver USB drive sitting in the center of the table and slid it 2 inches toward Miles. Before we read the distribution, Noelle said, her voice cool and professional, I want to address the objection you are currently formulating in your head. Mr. Rivera, you are thinking that Elena was ill. You are thinking that she was under the influence of pain medication. You are thinking that you can contest this document based on lack of capacity. Miles blinked, his mouth opening slightly. She had read his mind with terrifying precision. On this drive, Noelle continued, is a video recording of the signing ceremony, which took place 6 months ago. Present in the room were myself, 2 independent witnesses, and Dr. Aris Thorne, a court-appointed geriatric psychiatrist who conducted a 40-minute evaluation of your mother immediately prior to the signing. He certified that she was oriented to time, place, and person, and fully understood the nature and extent of her assets. She paused, letting the weight of the legal firewall sink in. There is no avenue for a challenge. Miles, if you sue, we will play this video in open court, and everyone will see Elena Rivera lucid, articulate, and very, very disappointed. Miles slumped back in his chair. The fight was draining out of him, replaced by a dawning horror. Noelle opened the red folder. She did not start with legal jargon this time. She pulled out a single sheet of blue stationery. Elena requested that I read this preamble before the articles of distribution, Noelle said. It is addressed to her children. She adjusted her glasses and began to read. To Miles and Sailor. I have spent 40 years keeping the peace. I have spent 40 years biting my tongue, smoothing over arguments, and pretending that I did not see what was happening in my own home. I let Gordon build his kingdom, and I let him raise Miles to believe that the kingdom was his birthright. That was my failure. I was too afraid of conflict to teach my son that worth is not measured in what you own, but in who you are. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was hearing her voice again, the rhythm, the cadence. It was Mom. But silence is not blindness. Noelle read, I saw everything, Miles. I saw you drift away. I saw you treat us like a bank branch that you only visited when you needed a withdrawal. I saw you look at your father's business not as a responsibility, but as a piggy bank. Miles flinched. Talia looked down at the table, her face pale. And Sailor, Noelle continued, looking at me. I saw you stay. I saw you give up your apartment. I saw you work double shifts and then come home to wash my sheets. I saw you swallow your pride every time your father dismissed you. I saw you carry the weight of this family while your brother was busy carrying an image. Ryan squeezed my hand so hard I thought he might break my fingers. I was crying now, silent tears tracking down my face. She had seen. All those nights I thought I was invisible. She was watching. The distribution of assets I have laid out is not a punishment for Miles. Noelle read, and it is not a reward for Sailor. You cannot reward love. It is not a transaction. This is simply the balance I could not create while I was alive. It is the fairness I was too weak to demand at the dinner table. So I am demanding it now. Noelle lowered the paper. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the break room down the hall. Article 1, Noelle said, shifting back to her lawyer voice. Real property. She picked up a document from the file, a deed with a gold seal. She slid it across the mahogany table. It stopped right in front of Miles. As we established, Noelle said, the residence at 4200 Oak Lane was the sole and separate property of Elena Rivera. She held the title free and clear. Miles looked at the deed. He did not touch it. He just stared at the name on the line, Elena Maria Rivera. I hereby devise and bequeath the family residence, Noelle read, to my daughter, Sailor Rivera, in fee simple absolute. The air left the room. No, Miles whispered. No, that is impossible. It is done, Noelle said. Sailor owns the house. She owns the land. She owns the contents. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Miles like a predator. And this brings us to your current legal exposure. Mr. Rivera, when you changed the locks last week, you were not securing an asset of the Gordon Rivera estate. You were forcefully entering a property that belonged to your sister. You were evicting the legal owner from her own home, in the state of Missouri. That is not just an administrative error. That is trespassing. That is conversion of property. That is actionable. Miles looked around the room, panic wild in his eyes. But I didn't know I thought it was Dad's. Ignorance of the title is not a defense for an executor, Noelle said coldly. You had a duty to investigate. You chose to act on arrogance instead of due diligence. We can fix this, Talia said suddenly. Her voice was shrill, desperate. We can buy her out. Miles, we can buy the house from her. We will pay market value. Sailor, we will pay you $600,000. Right now. I looked at Talia. She was shaking. She was terrified. You don't have $600,000. Talia, I said quietly. We do, she lied, her eyes darting around. We can get a loan. We just need the title. You cannot get a loan. Mister? Henderson spoke up. Everyone turned to the gray man from the bank. He had been so quiet, I had almost forgotten he was there. He opened his heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a thick binder. Why is he here? Miles asked, his voice trembling. Mom didn't have a trust. She didn't have any money to put in a trust. Your mother was a very frugal woman, Noelle said. And your father well. Gordon liked to keep his cash in the business. But Elena inherited a small portfolio from her aunt 30 years ago. Gordon told her it was pin money. He told her to buy shoes with it. Judith Langford laughed softly. It was a dry, bitter sound. He told her to buy shoes, so she bought Berkshire Hathaway. Miles's head snapped toward Judith. What? She invested it, Judith said, her eyes gleaming. She didn't tell Gordon. She knew if he knew about it, he would leverage it for one of his strip malls. So she kept it separate. She let it grow. Compound interest is a powerful thing over 30 years, Miles. Mr. Henderson is the trustee of the Elena Rivera Irrevocable Trust, Noelle said. Created 6 months ago. Irrevocable, Miles repeated. He knew what that word meant. It meant ironclad. It meant he couldn't touch it. It meant it was outside the probate process entirely. The trust holds the investment portfolio. Mr. Henderson said, opening the binder. As of the closing of markets yesterday, the total value of the assets is $2,400,000. Miles stopped breathing. Talia made a sound like she had been punched in the gut. 2.4 million. I sat there, stunned. My mother, the woman who clipped coupons, the woman who wore the same winter coat for 10 years, had been sitting on a fortune, and she had hidden it. She had hidden it from the husband who would have gambled it and the son who would have squandered it. The sole beneficiary of the trust, Mr. Henderson said, is Sailor Rivera. No, Talia screamed. She stood up, her chair crashing backward, the facade of the socialite, the tidy life, shattered completely. That is not fair, Talia yelled, her face blotchy and red. We need that money. You do not understand. We have a balloon payment due on the warehouse. We have the second mortgage. We are going to lose everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Miles closed his eyes. He looked like a dead man. Talia stood there, panting, realizing too late what she had just admitted. She had just confessed that the great Rivera Empire was insolvent. She had confessed that they were waiting for my parents to die so they could pay their bills. So it was true, Ryan said, his voice calm but filled with disgust. You were parting them out like salvage cars before they were even cold. We have rights, Talia sobbed. Miles is the son. He ran the company. He deserves half. It is community property. It is not community property, Noelle cut in, her voice sharp as a whip. It is a trust. It never entered the marital estate. It is gone. Talia, it belongs to Sailor. You cannot sue for it. You cannot claim it. It is over. Miles put his head in his hands. 2 million. He mumbled into his palms. 2 million. He wasn't mourning his mother. He was mourning the solution to his problems. He was watching his lifeline being cut. There is one final item, Noelle said. She did not look at Miles. She looked at me. A life insurance policy, she said. Taken out 5 years ago. Face value $500,000. Let me guess, Miles said, his voice muffled by his hands. Sailor? Yes, Noelle said. But there is a condition. She picked up the final document. This is not just about money, Noelle said softly. It is about closure. Elena knew that money would secure Sailor's future, but she wanted to ensure Sailor secured her past. She looked at Miles, who was staring at the table. Defeated. There is a final instruction letter, Noelle said. It is not in this room. It is in a safety deposit box inside the house at 4200 Oak Lane. The house, I whispered. Yes, Noelle said. Elena left a specific instruction. The final component of the estate, a specific file containing information about the family history and certain other sensitive documents, is locked in a wall safe in the pantry. The location is known only to her attorney. She turned to Miles. However, Noelle said, her voice dropping an octave, there was a trigger clause. Elena anticipated that you might try to block access to the house. She anticipated the lock change. Miles looked up, his eyes dull. What trigger? If the locks were changed prior to the reading of the will, Noelle said. And if Sailor was denied access to the property for more than 24 hours, the contents of that safe are to be considered activated. What does that mean? Talia asked. Wiping her eyes. It means, Noelle said, that we are going to the house, right now, all of us. We are going to open that safe. And whatever is inside it is no longer just a sentimental keepsake. It is part of the public record. I don't want to go, Miles said weakly. Just give her the money. I don't want to go back there. You have to, Noelle said. As the executor of Gordon's estate, your presence is required to witness the retrieval of items from the premises, unless you want to resign right now. Miles looked at Noelle. He looked at the deed in front of him. He looked at the gray banker with the $2 million. He looked at me. He realized he had no power left. He was not the king. He was just a witness to his own destruction. I will drive, Miles said, his voice hollow. No, Ryan said, standing up. You will follow us. Sailor rides with me. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my head was clear. I looked at the deed on the table, the piece of paper that said I was not a guest, not a nurse, not a burden, but the owner. I looked at Judith. She gave me a small, fierce nod. Go, she said. Go finish it. We walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back at Miles or Talia. I walked out into the lobby, past the terrified receptionist, and out into the cool, gray morning. We were going home. But this time, I wasn't going to be shivering on the porch. I was going to be the one opening the door, and I had a feeling that whatever was in that safe was going to hurt Miles more than losing $2 million ever could. Money was just math, but secrets were forever. The drive back to 4200 Oak Lane was nothing like the drive away from it 7 days ago. Last week, I had been shivering in the passenger seat of Ryan's car, clutching a wet box of photographs, watching my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror through a veil of rain. Today, the sky was a piercing, cloudless blue. We were not fleeing, we were arriving. I rode in the back of Noelle Hart's town car. Ryan sat beside me, his hand resting calmly on his knee. Behind us was a county sheriff's vehicle, the sunlight glinting off the light bar. Miles followed in his black SUV, trailing us like a prisoner being escorted to sentencing. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, yet entirely different. The for sale sign that Miles had likely planned to plant in the yard was nowhere to be seen. The shutters were still black, the siding still white, but the power dynamic had shifted so violently that the very architecture seemed to bow in deference to the legal documents in Noelle's briefcase. We got out. The air was crisp. I did not run to the porch this time. I walked. A locksmith was already there, waiting by the front door. He was a burly man with a tool belt who looked bored. He did not know he was about to open a fortress. Mr. Rivera, Noel said, gesturing to the door. Since you do not have the key to the locks you illegally installed, and you refuse to provide one this morning, we will proceed with the removal. Miles stood by his car, refusing to come closer. He looked like he was suffering from a migraine. He waved a hand weakly. Just open it, the drill whirred. It was a harsh, grinding sound that lasted only 30 seconds. But to me, it sounded like the chains of my past snapping one by one. The lock clicked. The door swung open. I stepped across the threshold first. The smell hit me instantly. It was the smell of disruption. The house did not smell like Mom's lavender and sage anymore. It smelled of cardboard and frantic activity. The living room was half empty. The antique armchair where Mom used to read was gone. The coffee table was bare. I walked into the kitchen. The counters had been cleared of the jars of dried herbs. The walls where family photos used to hang were blank, leaving rectangular ghosts on the paint where the sun hadn't faded the color. He was staging it, Ryan said, his voice low and angry. He was stripping the personality out of it to sell it as a blank slate. He was erasing her, I corrected. Miles walked in behind us, trailed by Talia. Talia looked around the kitchen, flinching as if she expected the appliances to attack her. Where is the safe? Noelle asked. She did not waste time commenting on the missing furniture. She was on a hunt. There is no safe, Miles muttered, leaning against the island. I checked the master bedroom. I checked the office. There is nothing. You checked the places a businessman would hide money, Noelle said. You did not check the places a mother would hide the truth. She walked past him, straight to the pantry. It was a narrow walk-in closet off the kitchen, filled with shelves of canned goods. But at the very back, behind a row of winter coats and brooms, was a false panel. I remembered this panel. It was where Dad used to hide his liquor when the doctor told him to cut back. Mom had taken it over years ago for her gardening supplies. Noelle reached behind a bag of potting soil and felt for a latch. There was a click. The panel swung open. Embedded in the wall was a small, gray steel safe. The combination, Noelle said, turning to me, is your birthday. Sailor, month, day, year? My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I stepped forward. I spun the dial. 061489. The handle turned. The heavy door creaked open. Inside, there was no cash. There were no diamonds. There was a thick manila envelope and a second silver USB drive. Noelle took them out and placed them on the kitchen island. She opened her laptop. You need to watch this, Miles, Noelle said. I do not want to watch any more videos, Miles said, looking at the floor. You have to, Noelle said, because this video explains why you are about to lose a lot more than just this house. She plugged in the drive. The screen flickered, and then my mother's face appeared. She was sitting in her garden. The sun was behind her, creating a halo effect. She looked tired, her skin pale, but her eyes were sharp. She was looking directly into the lens. Hello? Miles, the video version of my mother said. Miles flinched as if she had touched him. If you are watching this, it means you did it, Mom said. Her voice was sad, but resigned. It means you locked Sailor out. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed that I was just being a cynical old woman. I prayed that my son would rise to the occasion and protect his sister, but I had to prepare for the son I have. Not the son I wanted. Talia let out a small sob. Miles stared at the screen, his face draining of color. I know about the debts, Miles. Mom continued. I know about the loans you took out against the business. I know you were counting on selling this house to clear the ledger before the auditors came. Miles looked up at Noelle, panic rising in his chest. How did she know? So here is the arrangement. Mom said, I have instructed Noelle to include a conduct clause in the distribution of your father's estate. It is a trigger mechanism. If you, at any point prior to the final probate settlement, attempt to restrict Sailor's access to the family home, or if you attempt to liquidate any assets without her consent, a penalty is activated. I watched the screen. mesmerized. She had gamified her own death to protect me. The penalty is this, Mom said. Any funds that were designated for you from your father's business accounts are immediately frozen. They are to be transferred into a holding escrow to cover Sailor's legal fees, damages for emotional distress, and the cost of restoring any property you might have removed. You cannot do that, Miles shouted at the screen. That is Dad's money. It is the estate's money, Noelle interrupted calmly, and the executor has broad discretion to penalize a beneficiary for bad faith actions against the estate. Since you were the acting executor when you breached your fiduciary duty, the court will uphold the penalty. You triggered it, Miles. The moment you changed that lock, you froze your own inheritance. I did not want to do this, Mom said on the video, but you left me no choice. You think power is taking things, Miles, but real power is protecting people. Goodbye, my son. I hope one day you understand. The screen went black. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Miles was gripping the edge of the granite island, his knuckles white. The money is frozen, Talia whispered. All of it. Until a judge reviews the damages, Noelle said, which, given the backlog in probate court, could take 18 months. 18 months! Talia shrieked. We have 30 days. The bank is calling on the 1st of the month. Then I suggest you answer the phone, Noelle said coldly. She picked up the manila envelope. And now, Noelle said, we have the contents of the file. She opened it and slid a stack of papers across the island. They were photocopies. I leaned in to look. They were loan applications, bank statements, emails. What is this? I asked. This, Noelle said, is proof of why Miles was so desperate. I read the top email. It was from Miles to a loan officer at a private equity firm. Dated 2 years ago, subject collateral verification. Body. The property at 4200 Oak Lane is currently valued at $700,000. Title transfer is pending upon estate settlement. I can guarantee the equity position. He was pledging the house, Ryan said, reading over my shoulder. He was pledging a house he did not own to secure a business loan. That is bank fraud, the sheriff's deputy, who had been standing silently by the door, spoke up. His voice was deep and serious. Obtaining funds by false pretenses. Miles looked at the deputy, then at the papers. He looked like a trapped animal. I intended to pay it back, Miles stammered. It was a bridge loan. I was going to pay it off as soon as the market turned. But the market did not turn, Noelle said. And now you have a liquidity crisis, and because you decided to evict your sister, you have lost access to the only cash that could have saved you from prison. Talia lunged across the space between us. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate, her fingernails digging into my sweater. Sailor, she pleaded. Her face was a mask of terror. Sailor, you have to stop this. You have to tell them to release the funds. Please. We have children. We have a life. If the bank finds out about this fraud, Miles goes to jail. We lose everything. I looked at her hand on my arm. This was the woman who had sipped wine while watching me pick my photos out of the mud. This was the woman who had called me a mess she wanted to clean up. We are family, Talia sobbed. You cannot let your brother go to prison. Please, just sign the waiver. Just tell the lawyer to release the hold. I gently, but firmly, removed her hand from my arm. I took a step back. Family, I repeated. The word tasted like ash. You keep using that word, but you only use it when you need something. I looked at Miles. He was not begging. He was staring at the floor. Defeated. He knew. He knew that the game was over. I will not sign a waiver, I said. My voice was steady. I will not release the hold. The law will take its course. Sailor, Talia screamed. However, I said, I will make one concession. Not for you, for Mom. I pointed to the empty spots on the walls. You took her things, I said. You took her jewelry. You took her journals. You took the quilt she made by hand. They are in storage, Miles whispered. I put them in a unit. You have 24 hours, I said. You will return every single item. If a single teaspoon is missing, I will ask Noel to forward this file to the district attorney immediately. I will get them, Miles said. I will get them today. And one more thing, I said. You will sign a document admitting that you acted without authority. You will admit that this house is mine, and you will never, ever set foot on this property again without my written permission. I will sign, Miles said. He sounded exhausted. He sounded like a man who just wanted to stop drowning. Then go, I said. Sailor, Talia started. Go, I said, louder this time. Get out of my house. They left. They did not walk out with the swagger they had walked in with. They walked out like refugees, carrying the heavy burden of their own choices. I heard Miles's car start, the engine revving too high, a sound of frustration and finality. The sheriff's deputy nodded to me and followed them out to ensure they left the premises. Noelle closed her laptop and placed the USB drive in my hand. You did well, Noelle said softly. She would have been proud. She did all the work, I said, looking at the drive. She gave you the weapon, Noelle corrected. You chose to pull the trigger. That took courage. Noelle gathered her things. I will handle the paperwork for the return of the items. I will see you in my office next week to finalize the trust transfer. Until then, enjoy your home. Sailor. She left. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the empty, scary silence of the eviction. It was a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a dust storm settling. I walked to the back door and opened it. The air outside was sweet, smelling of damp earth and pine. I walked out into the garden. It was a mess. Miles had neglected it for weeks. Weeds were choking the hydrangeas. The rosemary bush was overgrown, but underneath the neglect, the structure was still there. The roots were deep. I knelt down in the dirt. I didn't care about my black slacks. I reached out and pulled a handful of crabgrass from the base of a rosebush. The earth felt cold and real against my fingers. Ryan walked up behind me. He didn't say anything. He just knelt down beside me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, shiny object. It was a key, a new key, cut by the locksmith 5 minutes ago. He placed it in my dirty palm. Welcome home, Ryan said. I closed my fingers around the metal. It bit into my skin, sharp and tangible. I looked at the garden. I looked at the house that had witnessed my entire life, the laughter, the silence, the illness, and the betrayal. Miles had wanted the house because he thought it was a bank account. He thought its value was in the square footage and the zip code. He never understood. The value wasn't in the walls. It was in the fact that I could stand here, on this patch of earth, and know that I hadn't sold my soul to keep it. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of the herbs Mom had planted to protect us. We have a lot of weeding to do, I said. Ryan smiled. We have time. I didn't smile back. I just looked at the horizon, where the sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the lawn. I wasn't rich in the way Miles wanted to be. I didn't have a yacht or a country club membership, but I had the key. I had the truth. And for the first time in my life, I had the last word. Mom didn't leave me a fortune to buy a new life. She left me the power to take back the one I already had. And that was worth more than any check Miles could have ever written. Thank you so much for listening to Sailor's story and walking this road of justice with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below with your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed seeing the underdog win, please make sure to subscribe to Juliet Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Until next time, stay strong.